executive branch. Fact 2, they have been planning for this day since President Trump took office. Fact 3, they accused the president first and then have spent months looking for a crime. Fact 4, but no evidence has been presented of an impeachable offense. During one of the partisan hearings, a member of this body asked if President Trump had evidence of his innocence. Why didn't he bring it forward? The Democrats want Americans to believe that our president is guilty until he proves himself innocent. This whole process is unconstitutional. Today we've heard both sides, but we need to get the truth. And the truth is the decision of who should be our president should be made by the American people, not Speaker Pelosi, Adam Schiff, and House Democrats. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel, Chairman Engel, for 3 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank my friend, Mr. Speaker. As chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I have to say that this is a sad day. No one is gleeful that the president's actions have brought us to this point, but when you boil it down, we're here today because the president abused the power of his office to help his chances of re-election. He used the enormous weight of the presidency and American foreign policy to push a foreign government to smear a political rival, and he got caught. Why is this conduct so serious? Why has the president's behavior pushed the House of Representatives to exercise one of its most consequential constitutional responsibilities? Because corrupting an American election, particularly in cahoots with a foreign power, means corrupting American democracy. Our elections are at the heart of our democracy, the foundation of what makes our system of government great, our republic, if we can keep it, as Benjamin Franklin once said. If our elections are unfair, then our republic cannot stand. Anyone who tries to fix an election is taking away the power of the American people to choose their leaders. If it happens at any level of government, it's toxic to our democracy. And this came from the highest level. In this case, it's even more serious, because what was the president willing to give up for this advantage? What price was he willing to pay? The price was our national security. When the president devised a shadow foreign policy that undermined our diplomacy and diplomats, when he held back assistance for Ukraine, who was embroiled in a war against Russia, when he pressured a foreign government to interfere in our elections, again, he sacrificed our security. He shook the faith of a loyal ally. He played right into the hands of Vladimir Putin. He weakened our country all because he thought it might help his re-election bid. Only the president has that power to corrupt our foreign policy for political gain. And the moment he chose to do so, the moment he undermined our security in a scheme to undermine our democracy, whether he succeeded or not, and thank God he did not, at that moment it became an abuse of power. And a president who abuses his power for personal gain is exactly what the framers feared. It's why impeachment is in the Constitution. So we need to pass these articles. The president's actions have left us no choice. He cannot be allowed to undermine our democracy and tear apart the fabric that holds our country together. So I will vote for impeachment, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This time I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Getz, a member of the Judiciary Committee.
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
This is not about the Ukraine. It's about power. Donald Trump has it, and House Democrats want it. And so with no crime, no victim, no evidence, no proof, no agenda for America, this impeachment charade marches on, following no rules and adhering to no sense of honor. The American people aren't fooled by dirty tricks. Voters will never forget that Democrats have been triggered into impeaching the president because they don't like him and they don't like us. Those who vote yes on today's articles of impeachment must carry the heavy burden of shame and guilt for as long as they serve in Congress, which won't be long because the American people will remember in November. Democrats would rather trip the president just to see him stumble than see America succeed. They'd rather impeach the president than work together for the common good of our country and our citizens. Democrats may have won the House in 2018, but they haven't forgiven Donald Trump for having the audacity to win the presidency. and they haven't forgiven you, the American people, for voting for him. The day before she was sworn into Congress, one member of the body said she promised to impeach the mother effer. She's not alone. Trump's impeachment was plotted and planned before the ink was even dry on his election certificate, and possibly before some Democrats could even point to the Ukraine on a map. In seeking the chairmanship of the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from New York said that he was the strongest member to lead a potential impeachment. Democrats may not have known why they were going to impeach the president, but they knew it was an inevitability. Facts be damned. This impeachment is a slap in the face to the millions of Americans who voted for President Trump. The same Americans that Democrats in Washington have mocked as smelly Walmart shoppers and deplorables. This impeachment isn't legitimate. It's the radical left's insurance policy. But we have an insurance policy too. It's the next election, and we intend to win it. I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I recognize the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch, for 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, we, the people, have a common tie that binds us together now as it has since the founding of our country, and it's our shared respect for the Constitution of the United States. Let us all step back from the maelstrom of the moment to recall that our country's inception 243 years ago, the concept of a democratic, self-governing rule was a breathtaking and idealistic aspiration. And when the 13 American colonies boldly rejected the rule of a British monarch, our founders were determined to form a government that would rule instead with the consent of the governed. Ensuring that this noble experiment endured through the ages was an enormous existential challenge. It was met with the adoption of the Constitution in 1788. And at its heart are two bedrock principles that have served as touchstones for our country ever since. First, it established America as a nation of laws where no person is above the law. Second, it established the concept of a separation of powers where three co-equal branches of government would check each other, lest power be concentrated in one at the expense of liberty to all. Madam Speaker, when President Trump abused the power of his office by soliciting foreign interference in the upcoming election for his personal benefit, he willfully infringed upon the right of citizens to decide who will lead our nation. And in doing so, he placed himself above the law and in violation of his oath. And when he denounced, denied, and defied the clear authority of Congress to investigate his conduct, he repudiated our constitutional system of checks and balances and further violated his oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. And it is for these reasons I will cast my vote in favor of impeaching President Donald John Trump. I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Some of my colleagues across the aisle have said, hey, where are the facts? As if we have the burden of proof. It's your burden of proof, Madam Chair. It's the Democrats' burden of proof. But the facts are unchanged. The Ukraine received the aid that they were promised and appropriated for. The aid was lawfully disbursed. In fact, it was disbursed within the time limits set by this Congress. If you wanted it sent to them before September 30th, 2019, should have put that in the legislation. You did not. The Ukrainians gave nothing in return. The Ukrainian president said he felt no pressure, no coercion, no duress, no conditionality. But what changed? On the day that the aid was released, 2 anti-corruption measures were signed into law by the Ukrainian president, President Zelensky. Democrats have manufactured this sham and then argue that refusing to cooperate is impeachable. The Supreme Court is currently considering the extent of executive privilege when fighting dubious subpoenas. But instead of taking their process to court or waiting for the court to rule on the pending case, the Democrats chose to press forward because simply they said, we don't want to wait. We don't have time, they say. But failing to do so is an abuse of power of this institution that will have grave consequences for our republic. Now, when the other side claims they proceed with soberness, I'm bemused by media reports that indicate they have been admonished not to do a jig today when they win the vote, which we know they will. I am struck that solemnity of process shouldn't need to have an admonition against levity. This process has been partisan, vindictive, dishonest. In this impeachment, Democrats have lied about the content of the July 25th call, met secretly with the whistleblower, held Soviet-style hearings behind closed doors where the Judiciary Committee, the Committee of Jurisdiction, could not attend, blocked the President's counsel from participating in the fact-finding portion of the Inquisition. It has been a sham from start to finish, and I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I recognize Mr. Scott for a unanimous consent request.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend remarks in favor of both articles of impeachment.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I recognize Mr. Carson, the congressman from Indiana, for 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, Madam Speaker, as we continue and consider this historic impeachment vote, let's be clear that the President's actions seriously jeopardize not only America's national security, but the security of our closest allies. His actions threaten the goals of the U.S.-led NATO alliance. You see, Ukraine is a nation working hard to make its democracy stronger. And make no mistake, Ukraine is on the front lines of Russian aggression. Thankfully, U.S. military aid helps Ukraine defend itself against Russia and integrate itself into the European community. When our European allies are stronger, America is stronger. We are better equipped to promote democracy and put a stop to tyranny. But to President Trump, strengthening this valuable national security objective, Madam Speaker, was not as important as smearing a political rival. Madam Speaker, we know that he held nearly $400 million of aid to Ukraine until President Zelensky agreed to help him dig up dirt on his potential 2020 opponent. This aid was approved by Congress with strong bipartisan support. President Trump's actions hurt American diplomacy and undermine the integrity of our nation's promises to our allies. We will not allow our leaders to trade away our national security. We cannot allow Russia's continued threats to democracy go unanswered. And we must not allow our own president of these United States to get away with breaking his own oath of office. Madam Speaker, that is why we take this solemn but necessary vote to impeach. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latta.
For what period?
Minute and a half.
Gentleman's recognized for a minute and a half.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a sad day for our country, one that our forefathers warned us against. We have watched this illegitimate impeachment process unfold while making a mockery of our constitutional duties. House Democrats have conducted the most polarizing impeachment process in our nation's history, and the men and women I represent are tired of this Democrat-run House putting political games above our nation's national interest. House Democrats held secret meetings, withheld important documents, deliberately misrepresented information to the public, and did not give due process to the president. This investigation was unfair, and the American people expect more out of Congress. The articles of impeachment are not based on facts, but instead are entirely politically motivated. The truth is, there was no pressure put on President Zelensky, and the transcripts confirm that there was no conditionality. This inquiry has been rigged from the start, lacking fairness, transparency, and truth. It has been a waste of taxpayers' dollars and is based off the opinion of an unnamed whistleblower and hearsay. The accusations in today's proceedings do not align with the facts. This impeachment process is out of step with existing precedent for presidential impeachment proceedings and is not a process I will support. I urge my colleagues to put country first and vote in opposition to the articles of impeachment. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I thank the gentleman. It is now my pleasure to recognize the gentlelady from New York. Chairwoman Maloney is recognized for 3 minutes.
Gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the impeachment of President Donald J. Trump. President Trump abused the power of his office for his own personal and political gain at the expense of our national security. President Trump's wholesale obstruction of Congress is unprecedented, indisputable, and impeachable. President Trump is the first president in history to openly and completely defy all aspects of the constitutional impeachment process. In an attempt to cover up his abuse of power, he ordered the entire executive branch not to participate in the inquiry and directed it to defy lawful subpoenas from Congress. As chairwoman of the Committee on Oversight and Reform, I find this obstruction particularly offensive. Even President Nixon accepted Congress's impeachment authority and allowed his aides and advisors to produce the documents to Congress. And President Nixon allowed current and former staff to testify in both the House impeachment and the Senate Watergate investigations, including his chief of staff and White House counsel.